As I lay cocooned in my sleeping bag, the deep silence of the forest was interrupted only by the occasional rustling of leaves or distant hoot of an owl. The air felt thick and oppressive, as though the night itself was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. It was that kind of quiet that wasn't exactly peaceful, more like a pause, as if everything had stilled for a reason. Suddenly, I felt it, a strange prickling at the back of my neck. My eyes shot open, and in that instant, my heart froze. There, on the other side of the tent's thin mesh screen, was a face staring in at me. Pale, with crooked features that seemed distorted, like they'd been stretched and twisted into some horrific imitation of a human visage. It was too close. Way too close. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes. Maybe I was still half dreaming, caught between sleep and wakefulness. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to convince myself that if I opened them again, the face would be gone. But when I cracked them open, it was still there, only now it looked even more intent, as though it was studying me. The corners of its mouth curled up into something resembling a smile, but it was far from friendly. It was the kind of smile that belonged in nightmares. My heart thundered as I struggled to stay still, feeling as though even the slightest movement would give me away. The air inside the tent felt suffocating, every shallow breath I took reverberating in my ears. My mind raced with questions. No, what was this thing? Why was it here? I felt paralyzed, a rabbit caught in the sights of a predator. Just as I started to inch my hand toward my flashlight, a low, shuffling sound broke the silence outside the tent, like something dragging itself around the perimeter. It circled the tent, the sound seeming to come from all directions at once. Then came the crack of a twig snapping, closer than before. I clutched my flashlight, fingers shaking as I held my breath, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. The face pressed closer, as though it was trying to push through the mesh. Its eyes, dark, unblinking, and disturbingly wide, bore into mine. They were hollow, devoid of any humanity, and as I stared into them, I felt as though I was looking into a bottomless pit. The skin around its eyes was stretched taut, giving it a manic, hungry look. The shuffling sounds intensified, accompanied by a faint, almost inaudible whispering. It sounded like multiple voices, all whispering over one another, merging into an incomprehensible, sinister chant. My chest tightened as I strained to make out the words, but they were just on the edge of hearing, like they were slipping through my fingers every time I got close. I blinked, and for a split second, I could have sworn the face had shifted. Its features seemed to be melting, rearranging themselves into something even more grotesque. One eye bulged while the other shrank, the mouth twisted unnaturally to the side. I wanted to scream, to do something, anything, but I was frozen, trapped by the horrid fascination of that distorted face. My skin prickled with a chill, and I felt bile rise in my throat. As I lay there, transfixed, a new sound cut through the whispers, a wet, squelching noise, like something was being dragged through the mud. The face outside tilted its head, as if it, too, had heard it. Its smile stretched impossibly wide, revealing crooked, yellow teeth that seemed to glisten in the faint light. I could feel my pulse hammering as the squelching grew louder, closer, the forest around me falling silent again in that same suffocating stillness. I gripped the flashlight tighter, finally daring to press the button. The weak beam flickered to life, casting a shaky light through the tent's mesh. The face immediately recoiled, its features twisting in apparent agony as the light touched it. For a brief, horrifying moment, I could see its skin bubbling, as if burned by the light. But as soon as it moved back into the shadows, the whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me from every direction. Outside, something brushed against the tent wall. The The fabric sagged inward slightly, as though a hand, no, a claw, was pressing against it. I stared, unable to move as the pressure traveled along the tent side, tracing the outline of a hand that dragged slowly from one end of the tent to the other, leaving a faint smear behind. Then, as abruptly as it started, the movement stopped. The face vanished, and the eerie silence returned, even thicker and more oppressive than before. I held my breath, feeling the tension melt with each passing second. And just as I began to think it might be over, a loud, blood-chilling scream pierced the night, echoing through the trees. It was close, too close. The scream sent a shockwave of terror through me, snapping me out of my stupor. I scrambled backward in the tent, pressing myself against the opposite wall, desperate to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was out there. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Was it real? Could it have been some kind of hallucination? But the sounds, the face, they felt too tangible, too visceral. And then, a low growl rumbled from somewhere nearby, deep and guttural, like the sound of a predator preparing to pounce. It was so close that I could almost feel the vibration. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling any sound that might escape as I lay there, every muscle in my body tense and coiled, waiting for whatever horror lurked outside to make its next move. Slowly, I forced myself to peer out of the mesh again, heart hammering so loudly I feared it would give me away. But this time, I saw nothing. The face was gone. The forest around me lay still, silent as a graveyard. A part of me dared to hope that maybe it had left, maybe whatever that thing was had lost interest. But just as that thought crossed my mind, something scratched against the tent, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging along the fabric. My blood ran cold as I realized it was coming from the side closest to my head. The scratching intensified, faster and more frantic, and I could hear the fabric beginning to tear, thread by thread. With a final, trembling breath, I mustered the courage to unzip the tent door just a fraction, hoping for a quick escape. But as I inched it open, a pale hand, too pale, too long, slid in through the gap. As the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I blinked awake, my whole body sore and mind fogged with exhaustion. The memories of the night before hung over me like a dark shadow, each one vivid and unsettling. But as I lay there in the dim morning light, I began to question what I'd seen. Had it been real? Or just some twisted, feverish dream? Maybe I'd been more exhausted than I realized, or perhaps my nerves had gotten the best of me out here, alone in the wilderness. I sat up slowly, rubbing my eyes and glancing around the tent, almost expecting to see some sign of last night's nightmare etched into the fabric. But it was just my sleeping bag, the clutter of my gear, the usual mess of a camp. I let out a shaky breath, forcing myself to relax. It was all just a nightmare, I told myself, a terrible nightmare brought on by too little sleep and too much caffeine. Yet, as I unzipped the tent and peered outside, the cold morning air hit me like a slap. That reassuring feeling of waking from a bad dream began to wither away. There, in the soft earth surrounding my tent, was a trail of footprints, human-shaped but disturbingly deep, as though whoever had left them was pressing with an unnatural weight. The prints circled around the tent over and over again before veering off into the trees. My stomach twisted, and I felt a surge of dread. My brain scrambled for logical explanations. Maybe it was another camper, playing some sick joke, I reasoned, but the thought offered little comfort. I forced myself to take a deep breath, pulling on my jacket and boots before stepping out to examine the tracks. They were irregular, some steps longer than others, almost like the person had been dragging a foot or limping. And as I followed them away from my tent, I noticed something else, claw-like impressions beside the footprints, as though whatever had circled my tent had used its hands to steady itself on the ground. I turned away from the tracks, my gaze sweeping over the surrounding forest, trying to pick up on anything out of place. A creeping unease began to settle into my bones, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees themselves seemed to loom closer, their branches hanging heavy and still, shadows pooling between their trunks. Just then, a glint caught my eye on one of the nearby trees. As I approached, I noticed a series of strange markings carved into the bark. They were jagged and irregular, like symbols scratched out in haste. I reached out, tracing a line with my fingertip. The cuts were fresh, the wood beneath still pale and raw. I couldn't make any sense of the symbols. They seemed almost like a language, or maybe just random marks made by something or someone with unsteady hands. But that wasn't all. As I scanned the trees, I saw more markings, like a trail that stretched off into the forest, each tree scarred with those same symbols. I kept walking, drawn forward by equal parts curiosity and fear. A few yards farther along, a shiver ran down my spine as I noticed something snagged on a low branch, a scrap of fabric, frayed and faded, dangling like some grisly decoration. It looked like a piece of clothing, but I didn't recognize it as mine. My pulse quickened as I examined it. It looked old, as if it had been out here for months, withered by the elements. I couldn't shake the thought that it didn't belong here, yet it seemed familiar. My mind flashed back to stories I'd heard of campers and hikers who'd gone missing in these woods over the years. Could this fabric have belonged to one of them? The idea took root in my mind, and with it, a surge of paranoia. I glanced around, suddenly feeling as though every tree, every shadow was hiding something just out of sight. The forest was quiet, almost unnaturally so, and I strained to hear anything, the chirping of birds, the rustle of animals, anything to break the silence. But all I could hear was the thumping of my own heartbeat. Then, at the base of a large tree, I spotted something half buried in the undergrowth. Kneeling down, I brushed away the dirt and leaves to reveal a small, withered object. It was a locket, tarnished and caked with mud. My breath caught in my throat as I held it up to the light. I knew this locket. I'd seen it before, years ago. It was exactly like one my grandmother used to wear, an heirloom passed down through our family. But she had taken it with her when she passed. No one had seen it since. My mind raced, struggling to find a rational explanation for how this particular locket could be here, miles from anywhere, in the middle of this forest. It didn't make sense. Yet, as I held it, a strange, sinking feeling washed over me, as though I were somehow tied to this place, bound by threads I couldn't see. The forest felt different now, colder, like something was pressing in on me from all sides. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever, or whoever, had left the footprints around my tent had placed this locket here, for me to find. I let the locket slip from my hand, leaving it in the dirt as I stumbled back toward my campsite, my mind buzzing with a mixture of dread and disbelief. When I finally returned, I froze in shock. My camp had been disturbed. The fire pit stones were arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic circle, and my supplies had been scattered around the campsite. My backpack lay on its side, half its contents spilled onto the ground, but nothing seemed missing. Instead, it looked as though someone, or something, had rummaged through my things, inspecting them with a strange, almost childlike curiosity. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I took in the disarray. My water bottle was open, lying on its side, spilling into the dirt. The tent flaps were unzipped, even though I distinctly remembered closing them before I left. And there, on the ground next to my sleeping bag, lay another scrap of fabric, similar to the one I'd found in the forest. It was almost as if someone had left a trail, leading me deeper and deeper into this twisted game. Every instinct screamed at me to pack up and leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But even as the thought crossed my mind, a strange compulsion held me in place, a gnawing feeling in my gut that told me I needed to understand what was happening here. Some part of me, irrational as it was, felt that if I left now, I'd be leaving behind answers I might never find again. Despite the fear simmering in my chest, I began methodically gathering my things, trying to restore some semblance of order to my camp. But as I picked up each item, an icy realization crept over me. There were things here that didn't belong to me. A small knife, rusty and worn, lay near my bedroll, and a piece of paper, brittle and yellowed, poked out from under my backpack. I picked it up, my fingers shaking as I unfolded it. The paper was blank, but smeared with what looked like old, faded fingerprints. A strange, earthy smell rose from it, like damp soil mixed with something metallic, something almost coppery. I sat there, holding the paper, feeling as though I were caught in some surreal nightmare. Every piece of the puzzle only deepened the mystery, drawing me further into the web of fear and uncertainty that seemed to have ensnared this place. A chill ran through me as a single, dreadful thought echoed in my mind. What if I wasn't alone out here? What if someone, or something, had been watching me this whole time? For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind set my nerves on edge. I forced myself to act calm, to pretend that nothing was wrong. But deep down, I knew something terrible was lurking in these woods, something ancient and relentless. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I forced myself to settle back into camp, the creeping chill of night seeping through my bones. The events of the previous night haunted me, each flicker of shadow making me jump. The footprints, the eerie carvings on the trees, the strange rearrangement of my belongings, everything pointed to something sinister lurking nearby. And yet, against all reason, I found myself rooted in place. I was driven by an inexplicable need to understand, to confront whatever had drawn me here, even if it was something far darker than I could comprehend. I spent the evening in silence, my flashlight beside me and a few camping tools within arm's reach, more for psychological comfort than anything. The fire crackled, the flames casting dancing shadows that flickered across the trees, stretching and shrinking like phantom figures. Every rustle, every snap of a twig outside my field of vision made my skin prickle with dread, but I forced myself to stay still, waiting. It was as if some part of me knew that this night would bring answers, whether I wanted them or not. Hours passed, each one longer than the last, and the fire's glow faded into embers. As the darkness thickened, so did the feeling of being watched. I fought to keep my eyes open, determined to catch a glimpse of whatever had been haunting my campsite. My mind was heavy with exhaustion, yet somehow alert, each nerve in my body tuned to the silence around me. And then, it happened. I didn't hear it approach, but suddenly, there it was, hovering at the edge of my vision, closer than before. My blood ran cold as I saw it, the face. Its crooked features were even clearer in the faint glow of the dying fire, each twist and distortion more disturbing than I remembered. The eyes were wide, dark voids that seemed to pierce right through me, and its mouth twisted into that same unnatural smile. It was inches from the tent wall, the pale skin almost luminous against the black of night. It seemed closer than physically possible, as if it were pressing through some thin veil separating us. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming at me to retreat, to pull back and hide. But I knew that wouldn't get me anywhere. This thing, whatever it was, would keep coming. It had to be confronted. I took a steadying breath, mustering every ounce of courage, and reached for the tent zipper. The metal tap felt cold and heavy between my fingers as I pulled it down, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet night. With the tent barely unzipped, I hesitated, forcing myself to lean forward and peer through the small opening, heart hammering in my chest. The face remained still and watchful, its eyes fixed on me. I steeled myself, widening the gap just a bit more, hoping to catch a better look at what lay beyond those twisted features. But the moment I fully opened the flap, the face vanished, dissolving into the darkness. In its place, I saw something even more disturbing. There, etched into the ground just outside my tent, were symbols, strange, angular marks that carved a precise, deliberate pattern into the soil. I stepped out, feeling my breath hitch as I moved closer. The symbols were unmistakable, and they formed a tight circle around my campsite, as if encasing me within some kind of ritual boundary. They were drawn in a substance I couldn't identify, too dark to be mere dirt, with an earthy, metallic scent that made my stomach churn. I knelt down, tracing one of the symbols with my finger, feeling the rough, gritty texture beneath my touch. The shapes seemed familiar, yet alien, like an ancient script I'd seen in a forgotten book or a half-remembered dream. It struck me that they might have been here all along, slowly closing in over the course of the night, marking my territory with each new appearance of that horrifying face. A shiver ran through me as I realized the implications. Asterisk, had I been marked? Was I part of some ritual? Asterisk, I glanced around, half expecting the face to reappear, watching me from the edge of the firelight, but the woods remained empty, silent save for the occasional whisper of the wind. The weight of my isolation pressed in on me, each minute amplifying the unnatural stillness of the forest. My gaze fell on the symbols again, and a strange compulsion took hold of me. I felt a sudden urge to follow the patterns, to see where they led. Against my better judgment, I walked the perimeter of the symbols, examining each mark. The more I studied them, the more they seemed to take on an unsettling coherence, a twisted kind of logic that made sense in ways I didn't fully understand. They were designed to be seen, to be understood by someone or something. As I completed the circle, a chill shot down my spine. The symbols seemed to converge in places, forming points along the boundary that looked almost like crude arrows, all pointing inward, directly at my tent. The realization hit me like a wave, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. Asterisk, was this a warning? Or an invitation? Asterisk. The oppressive silence settled again, and I found myself standing in the middle of that eerie circle, alone in the quiet expanse of the forest. And then, the wind shifted, bringing with it a faint, guttural whisper that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the trees. It was the same whispering I'd heard the night before, an unintelligible murmur that clawed at the edges of my sanity. It grew louder, rising and falling in waves, like a chant in a language I couldn't understand. My instincts screamed at me to run, to break free from the circle and escape into the woods, but something in me resisted. Instead, I sank to my knees, my body feeling heavy, as though weighed down by the force of those whispers. They grew louder, more insistent, filling my head until they were all I could hear. In the haze of fear and exhaustion, a realization surfaced, chilling me to the core. Asterisk, these symbols, they weren't meant to keep something out. They were meant to keep me in. Asterisk, the face, the markings, the locket, it was all connected, part of some twisted ritual designed to ensnare me, to bind me to this place. I was trapped, held here by forces I couldn't understand. Desperation took hold, and I scrambled back to my tent, fumbling through my bag for anything that might break the spell, anything that would disrupt the circle and free me from whatever nightmare I had stumbled into. My hands closed around my flashlight, and with a surge of resolve, I flicked it on, shining the beam across the ground in a frantic attempt to erase the symbols. But as the light hit them, the markings seemed to pulse, darkening as though absorbing the light, growing more defined with each passing second. I felt a wave of nausea, the metallic scent intensifying until it filled my lungs, my head. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the tent as the whispers reached a fevered pitch, wrapping around me like a vice. A cold wind tore through the trees, whipping around the campsite and extinguishing the last remnants of my fire. Darkness swallowed me whole, leaving only the faint glow of my flashlight. I shone it wildly, searching for any sign of the face of whatever was tormenting me. But there was nothing, only those symbols staring back at me with silent, malicious intent. The whispers grew softer, fading into the background like a receding tide, leaving me alone in the silence once more. I could feel my pulse racing, each beat a hollow echo in my chest. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, of what had happened here. But no answers came, only the suffocating weight of dread that pressed down on me from all sides. A sudden rustling sound broke the silence, and I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the trees. There, at the edge of the light, I saw movement, a flash of pale skin, a glimpse of that twisted, leering face. It watched me, unmoving, its eyes gleaming with an unnatural hunger. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it melted back into the shadows, leaving me alone with the symbols. My breath came in shallow gasps as I realized what it wanted, what this ritual was meant to do. It wasn't here to hurt me, not yet. It was here to bind me, to hold me in this place until I became part of whatever twisted game it was playing. The locket, the fabric, the face, they were all pieces of the same puzzle, each one drawing me deeper into the web of terror that had ensnared this place. I felt my grip on reality slipping, the boundary between nightmare and truth blurring as I sat in the middle of that ritualistic circle. Every instinct screamed for me to leave, to escape while I still could. But as I glanced at the symbols one last time, a terrible certainty took hold of me. I knew, with chilling clarity, that whatever was out there wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. As dawn began to creep through the forest, I was already wide awake, eyes darting around the tent, my heart racing. After the terror of last night, the decision was clear. I needed to leave this place. There was nothing rational left to hold on to. Whatever was haunting these woods wouldn't stop until it broke me. I started packing with trembling hands, frantically stuffing my belongings into my bag, my mind consumed by a single, desperate thought, asterisk, get out before it's too late, asterisk. With my bag packed and my tent half collapsed, I took one last look around the campsite. Everything was as it had been left in the eerie darkness, save for one small object that lay half buried at the edge of the ritualistic circle. It was a charm, small, tarnished, and faintly glinting in the early morning light. It looked old, worn down by years, if not decades, yet there was something oddly comforting about it. Without thinking, I slipped it into my pocket, hoping it might offer some protection, a feeble shield against whatever forces were at work here. With my things gathered, I set out, following the faint trail I'd used to enter the forest just a day before. But after only a few minutes, an unsettling realization sank in. The trail felt different. The trees looked unfamiliar, the path winding in ways I didn't remember. Each turn seemed to twist back on itself, as though I were being led in circles. I kept walking, my steps growing faster and more frantic as the trees around me thickened, casting strange, elongated shadows. The world felt distorted, bending in ways that made no sense. An hour passed, then another. I walked until my legs felt like lead, pushing forward as panic clawed at the edges of my mind. But every time I thought I found the right way out, I ended up back at my campsite. It was like a cruel joke, the clearing reappearing around every turn, mocking me with its calm stillness. The fire pit, the remnants of my tent, the circle of symbols etched into the ground, they were all there, waiting, as if they'd known I'd never be able to escape. I tried again and again, wandering off in different directions, marking trees with sticks and stones, hoping to chart a clear route. But no matter how hard I tried, the forest warped and twisted, shifting the trails in ways that defied logic. Soon, a suffocating sense of déjà vu settled over me, each return to camp filling me with a growing dread. I was trapped, ensnared in an endless loop that had no exit. As I slumped against a tree, the exhaustion began to take its toll. My vision blurred, and I felt an unnatural chill settle over me, a prickling sensation at the nape of my neck. Then, from the shadows, I caught a fleeting glimpse, a pale face, watching from the trees, just out of reach. I whipped around, but it vanished the instant I focused on it, slipping back into the forest like a phantom. My hand shook as I scanned the trees, heart pounding, but nothing appeared. Just silence, thick and impenetrable. Then, it happened again. A murmur, soft, almost playful, whispered my name from somewhere deep within the woods. I froze, my pulse quickening as the whisper grew louder, more insistent. The voice was barely human, carrying an edge that made my skin crawl. It repeated my name over and over, echoing through the trees, each repetition burrowing into my mind. Asterisk, come back. Asterisk, it was luring me, coaxing me towards something unseen, something waiting in the depths of the forest. Ignoring the whispers, I stumbled forward in another direction, desperate to break free of the loop. But as I walked, the same face reappeared, flickering in and out of view between the trees, closer each time. Its twisted features loomed in the distance, pale and unnatural, lips stretched in a smile that seemed to grow wider with every glance. It was as if the face was part of the forest itself, shifting with the branches, following me no matter where I went. The whispers persisted, growing louder, and soon they were everywhere, circling around me, filling the air with their haunting chant. It was my name, repeated in tones that ranged from soft and lilting to harsh and guttural. They burrowed into my mind, shaking my resolve and filling me with a hollow terror that gnawed at my sanity. I tried to block it out, focusing instead on moving forward, hoping that each step might lead me away from the nightmare. But every path, every new direction, only brought me back to the clearing. Each loop around the forest seemed to drain me, leaving me weaker, more disoriented, until I could barely tell one tree from another. My head spun, my vision blurred, and I could feel myself teetering on the edge of collapse. Eventually, I found myself back at the campsite, my body trembling with exhaustion. I collapsed onto the ground, too weak to keep going. I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small charm I'd found earlier, clutching it tightly in my hand. I couldn't explain it, but something about the charm felt protective, like a small barrier against the creeping darkness that surrounded me. I traced its shape, feeling the worn edges, hoping it might somehow shield me from whatever was lurking in the forest. The whispers subsided as night fell, but the sense of dread only deepened. I crawled back into the remains of my tent, pulling the fabric around me like a cocoon, the charm clasped tightly in my fist. My mind was fogged with fear, my heart racing as I listened to the silence outside. Every nerve was on edge, anticipating the return of the face, the whispers, the strange symbols that bound me to this place. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes. I'd lost all sense of time. But eventually, I heard it again, that faint rustling outside the tent. My muscles tensed as I waited, breath held, hoping it was just an animal passing by, some harmless creature foraging in the dark. But then, from just outside the thin walls of the tent, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft and deliberate, circling around me. My grip on the charm tightened, my hands sweating as I tried to stay calm. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, until I could feel the faint vibration of each step through the ground. And then, there it was, right outside the mesh window, barely a foot away. The face. It was clearer than ever, illuminated by some unseen light that cast its crooked features in sharp relief. Its eyes were wide, unblinking, the pupils like empty black holes that seemed to suck in all light. The mouth twisted into that familiar, horrifying smile, as if it were pleased by my fear, savoring it. And then, slowly, it lifted a finger, pointing directly at me, as if marking me. The whispers returned, louder this time, filling my mind with a deafening cacophony that drowned out every thought. They chanted my name, repeating it over and over in a macabre lullaby that grew in intensity, each syllable more frenzied than the last. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides as the face continued to stare, unblinking. I tried to focus on the charm, clutching it as though it were a lifeline, a single thread tethering me to reality. The whispers seemed to falter, just slightly, at the touch of the charm. Desperation gripped me, and I began muttering under my breath, repeating the few phrases I could remember from my childhood prayers, hoping against hope that they might offer some form of protection. The face recoiled, if only for a moment, its eyes narrowing as though irritated. But then, its smile widened, and a guttural laugh echoed through the tent, a sound that was both inside and outside of me, reverberating through my very bones. The face faded into the shadows once more, leaving only the symbols etched around the campsite and the suffocating darkness pressing in from all sides. With the last of my strength, I buried myself deeper into my sleeping bag, the charm clasped tightly in my hand, my mind a haze of terror and exhaustion. I whispered to myself, over and over, trying to drown out the whispers, the memory of the face, the inescapable dread that filled every inch of my body. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't alone here. Whatever was in this forest, it had found me, marked me, and now it was only a matter of time. The face, the whispers, the symbols, they were all part of something I couldn't understand, something that wouldn't let me leave until it had taken everything from me. As I lay there, clutching the charm, my eyes fixed on the shadows outside the tent, I felt the weight of the forest press down on me, consuming the last remnants of my resolve. I woke with a start, the remnants of a fevered, nightmare-ridden night clinging to me. My hand went instinctively to my pocket, reaching for the small charm I clung to so desperately, but I found only emptiness. I patted around the tent, my fingers scraping against cold earth and crumpled fabric, but the charm was nowhere to be found. Instead, just outside the thin walls of my tent, a new symbol had appeared, its jagged lines carved into the ground with an unsettling precision. The shape was foreign, yet oddly familiar, a strange mix of spirals and sharp angles, almost like a compass, but twisted, pointing in all directions and none at once. Panic flared up inside me, surging into anger. This had to be some kind of twisted game. I'd heard of people doing strange things to scare campers, pranks meant to send people running back to civilization. But deep down, I knew this was more than that. Whoever or whatever was tormenting me was far beyond anything rational. And now, with my only source of comfort gone, I felt an unsettling emptiness that gnawed at my confidence. But I couldn't stay there forever, cowering in the tent. I packed up once more, leaving the tent behind, and pushed deeper into the forest, following what seemed to be a barely visible trail, a faint disturbance in the ground, leading off into the trees. Each step brought a fresh wave of unease, as if the forest itself were watching me, guiding me further from safety. The sun struggled to break through the canopy, casting odd, fractured shadows that twisted the landscape into strange shapes. As I moved along the path, I began to notice strange objects scattered around me. The first was a piece of old, yellow paper half buried in the dirt. I knelt down, brushing away the loose soil, and saw faded handwriting covering the page. It was part of a journal entry. The ink was smeared in places, but I could make out bits and pieces. Haven't seen anyone for days. There's something here, watching me. I can feel it. Can't find the way out, traps me at night. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The handwriting was hurried, panicked. It sounded far too familiar, a mirror of my own thoughts. I stuffed the page into my pocket and pressed on, each step growing heavier as if the forest itself were weighing me down. Further along, I found more items, an old photograph of a man and a woman standing by a river, their faces faded and obscured by time. It had an eerie quality to it, as if the people in the photo were looking at me, aware of my presence. I turned it over and saw scrawled handwriting on the back, *, don't trust it. *. My heart raced as I pocketed the photo, feeling the weight of their warning settle on me like a shroud. What did they mean? And who was it? My mind wandered back to the face, that twisted, unnatural smile that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Was that what they meant? Was I following a trail left by someone, or something, that thrived on the fear it sowed? I tried to shake off the thought and kept moving. As I ventured deeper, the air grew thicker, colder, and I found myself shivering despite the exertion. Then, tucked in a cluster of brambles, I saw a strip of fabric, bright red, standing out against the dull greens and browns of the forest floor. I picked it up, my fingers brushing over the rough, torn edges. It was from a jacket, or maybe a backpack, and it looked recent. It couldn't have been out here for more than a few days, yet there was no sign of anyone else in the forest. The deeper I went, the more I found. A boot, half buried in mud. Another scrap of paper, this one with more frantic writing that barely made sense, as if the author had been in a state of pure panic. It's everywhere. I can hear it in the trees. No escape. Please, someone find this, *. My stomach twisted as I read the words, the raw desperation seeping into me, echoing the fears that I tried to bury since the face first appeared. I looked up, scanning the trees, half expecting to see that pale face staring back at me. And there it was, barely visible through the shifting leaves, a glimpse of crooked features that disappeared the moment I focused on them, slipping back into the shadows like a predator playing with its prey. I felt sick, a gnawing realization creeping over me. I was being led, herded deeper into the forest, into its territory. The trail led to a clearing ringed with ancient, towering trees whose branches reached up to the sky like twisted arms. In the center lay more items, a torn map, fragments of camping gear, even a water bottle half filled with murky liquid. They were relics of others who had come before me, all scattered in a haphazard pattern that formed an almost ritualistic display. It was as if someone, or something, had collected these items, marking them like trophies. As I looked around, I felt the suffocating weight of eyes on me again. I turned slowly, and there, just beyond the edge of the clearing, was the face, watching from the shadows. It was closer this time, its features sharper, more defined, and I could make out the hollow, unnatural eyes staring straight at me. A twisted smile stretched across its face, a look of satisfaction, as if it were pleased with my fear. I felt an overwhelming urge to confront it, to demand answers, but my voice caught in my throat. My limbs felt heavy, frozen in place as I met its gaze. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The face didn't move, it just watched, that unnatural smile never wavering. And then, as if in response to some unspoken command, it disappeared into the shadows. I stumbled back, my mind racing. There was no mistaking it. The face had led me here, guided me along a twisted trail of clues and memories of others who had come before me. I realized with a sinking horror that I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. This place was a trap, a lure for the unwary, and the face was its guardian, its collector, feeding off the fear it instilled. In a daze, I turned to leave, but the path was gone. The trees around me had shifted, closing in, and every direction seemed blocked by thick undergrowth and dense shadows. Panic flared up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, scanning the clearing for any sign of a way out. That's when I noticed another symbol carved into the ground, just a few feet away. It was larger than the others, more elaborate, and it seemed to pulse with a strange energy, drawing me toward it. I approached cautiously, feeling a strange pull, as if the symbol held some key to understanding this nightmare. But as I reached out to touch it, a familiar chill washed over me, and the whispers began again, soft and insidious, wrapping around my mind like tendrils. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, each voice blending into the next in a dissonant chorus. They repeated phrases I couldn't fully understand, fragments of thoughts, pleas for help, warnings, all swirling around me in a chaotic symphony. But one phrase stood out, repeating over and over, louder than the rest, asterisk, join us. Join us, asterisk. I recoiled, stumbling back from the symbol, but the whispers only intensified. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, and I felt the presence of others, faint, translucent figures flickering at the edge of my vision. I could see their faces, twisted in expressions of fear and despair, each one bearing the same haunted look, as if they were trapped in an endless cycle of torment. And then, I understood. These were the others, the campers, hikers, and wanderers who had come before me, all drawn into this forest, claimed by the same force that now haunted me. They were part of it now, bound to this place, their souls trapped in a web of fear and darkness. And if I didn't find a way out, I would be next. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted from the clearing, pushing through the undergrowth, ignoring the scratches and bruises as branches clawed at my skin. The whispers pursued me, growing louder, more insistent, filling my mind with fragments of their memories, their terror. I ran blindly, driven by a single, desperate thought, escape, before it was too late. But no matter how far I ran, the face was always there, lurking just beyond the trees, watching, waiting. Its presence was inescapable, a constant reminder that I was trapped in its domain. The forest closed in around me, the paths twisting back on themselves, and I felt my hopes slipping away, replaced by a crushing certainty. I wasn't meant to leave. This place had chosen me, marked me, and the face was simply waiting for the moment when I would finally give in, joining the others in the endless shadows of the forest. As I stumbled into the clearing, the sight of the shelter took me aback. It was ramshackle, pieced together from broken branches, weather-beaten tarps, and remnants of old camping gear. The structure leaned precariously to one side, like it had been abandoned long ago, yet there was a disturbing sense of presence about it, as if the place was still waiting, watching, holding on to something unseen. My footsteps echoed in the quiet as I approached, heart pounding in my chest. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols etched deep into the wood, darkened and worn from time. I couldn't make sense of them at first, but as I stepped closer, running my fingers lightly over the engravings, I realized that some of these markings were words, sentences scrawled in shaky, desperate handprints. Beware the face that twists in the shadows. It is ancient, tormented, bound to this place. My blood turned cold as I read, recognizing the descriptions as echoes of my own nightmarish experience. Every line was a warning, each word a plea from someone who had been here before me, someone who had seen the face and felt the same fear that clawed at me. I kept reading, feeling like I was unraveling a secret history, a hidden story trapped within these walls. Once human, now a creature of rage and loneliness. It waits, it watches, seeking something it can never have. The words painted a dark picture, telling of a creature, once human, twisted by centuries of isolation and resentment. They spoke of a curse, a transformation born out of betrayal and bitterness, leaving it a fractured, tormented being bound to this forest. My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of it all, piecing together the legends of this entity, a creature cursed to wear a face shaped by pain and hate, forever hunting, luring people to share in its suffering. As I processed the horrific realization that the face was not a person, but something far more ancient and malevolent, a soft rustling sound broke the stillness behind me. Every hair on my body stood on end, and I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears. I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, the dim light filtering through the trees, casting shadows that twisted and morphed around me. I scanned the edge of the clearing, half expecting to see the face peering out from the darkness. But there was nothing, only the silent trees and the cold, empty shelter. And then, another rustle, a faint but deliberate movement, as if something was shifting closer, inching toward me. I backed up, my breath shallow, eyes darting from one corner of the clearing to the other. In the silence, the sound of my own heartbeat seemed deafening. The shelter loomed behind me, its strange carvings feeling like the only tether to reality in the thickening fog of fear. Just when I thought I couldn't bear the silence any longer, a shadow shifted at the far end of the clearing. There it was again, the face. Its features were warped, twisted in an expression of something beyond mere anger or sorrow. It was a mask of pure, unbridled malice, its crooked eyes locked onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. It stepped forward, if one could call that movement stepping. It didn't seem bound by the physical constraints of walking. It was as if the forest itself carried it forward, the shadows drawing it closer with every heartbeat. I backed away, stumbling over a root, my gaze never leaving that ghastly, contorted face. In the dim light, I could see every detail, every line of despair and hatred etched into its twisted features. It was a face that didn't belong in this world, something so grotesque and warped that it seemed to defy reality itself. As it moved toward me, the carvings on the shelter's walls seemed to glow faintly, almost as if they were reacting to the creature's presence. The symbols hummed with a strange energy, a warning, or perhaps a plea for mercy. I felt a chill run through me as I realized that the carvings weren't just decorations, they were protections, talismans meant to keep this creature at bay. But they wouldn't protect me outside the shelter. My only chance was to get inside, to surround myself with those ancient symbols and hope they would be enough to hold it off. I backed up slowly, eyes locked on the creature as I crossed the threshold into the shelter. The air grew thick, and the walls seemed to close in around me, the symbols almost pulsing with a life of their own. I felt a strange, oppressive energy, as if I had stepped into a place caught between worlds, a fragment of someone else's terror preserved within these walls. The creature halted at the edge of the shelter, its face hovering just beyond the threshold, twisted in a way that suggested it was struggling to cross the boundary. It stared at me, hollow eyes piercing into mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something else, a glimmer of sadness, maybe even remorse. But it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same cold, unrelenting malice. I didn't dare breathe as it reached out a hand, its fingers gnarled and thin, hovering inches from the shelter's entrance. The symbols on the walls began to pulse more rapidly, a faint glow emanating from the carvings, as if they were pushing back, holding the creature at bay. But I could feel the tension in the air, the strain as the barrier struggled to hold. My gaze fell on one carving in particular, a small, circular symbol at the base of the wall, nearly hidden beneath layers of dirt and grime. It looked different from the others, more intricate, as if it were the center of the shelter's power. Desperation drove me to reach out, brushing away the dirt with trembling fingers, revealing the symbol in full. As I uncovered it, the shelter seemed to react, the entire structure vibrating with a low hum. The creature recoiled, its twisted face contorting in pain, a hollow, inhuman scream tearing through the air. I covered my ears, the sound reverberating in my skull, filling me with a deep, primal fear. It staggered back, clawing at the air as if trying to force its way through the invisible barrier. But the shelter held firm, the symbols glowing brighter with every second. The creature's face twisted in agony, its hollow eyes filled with a burning rage that seemed to reach out and scorch me where I stood. And then, with one final, soul-wrenching scream, it vanished into the shadows, melting away as if it had never been there at all. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight. My hands shook as I slumped against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. I glanced around the shelter, my gaze lingering on the carvings that had saved me. They seemed less vibrant now, the glow fading as the creature retreated into the forest. But I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. It was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance. I had only bought myself time, a brief reprieve in a forest that seemed to hold its own twisted logic. And I knew, deep down, that the shelter wouldn't protect me forever. I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of those who had come before me, the carvings their only legacy, their final attempt to warn others. The weight of their desperation settled over me, and I realized that I was now part of that legacy, a reluctant participant in a cycle of fear and survival. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the clearing, and I knew I had to make a choice. I could stay here, clinging to the safety of the shelter's symbols, or I could try to leave, to find my way out before darkness fell and the creature returned. As I stood, gathering my strength, I felt a strange sense of resolve. The forest had tried to trap me, to break me, but I wasn't going to give in. Not yet. I stepped out of the shelter, taking one last look at the carvings, the words and symbols that had saved my life. And with a deep breath, I turned toward the forest, determined to find a way out before nightfall. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere, in the shadows, the twisted face was still waiting, ready to resume its relentless hunt. And as the trees closed in around me, the shelter fading from view, I knew that the legend was far from over. I ran, each breath a desperate gasp as the shadows pressed in around me. The forest seemed alive, twisting and shifting, guiding me deeper into its depths. But then, through a haze of terror, I saw it, a narrow path half hidden by overgrown vines and leaves. My heart leapt. Could this be a way out? Without hesitation, I stumbled onto the path, letting it lead me as I glanced back, half expecting the twisted face to appear behind me. My every step seemed amplified, leaves crunching beneath my feet, as if the forest itself was alerting whatever haunted me that I was attempting to flee. The path was narrow, barely wide enough to pass through, flanked by trees whose branches reached out like bony hands, snagging my clothes, scratching my arms as I pushed forward. I kept my eyes fixed ahead, hoping that each turn, each step, would bring me closer to freedom. But something was wrong. No matter how far I went, the forest grew darker, colder. I could feel it, the presence, inching closer with every heartbeat. And then, just at the edge of my vision, I saw it again. The face was back, lurking just beyond the trees, following me like a shadow. Its crooked, unnatural features were even clearer now, twisted in an expression that wavered between anger and glee. I looked away, quickening my pace, but I could still feel it watching me, studying me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, it seemed closer, its hollow eyes piercing through the darkness, tracing my every move. The whispers started again, faint at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each step I took. They were no longer distant, indecipherable sounds. Now, they were words, unmistakably familiar, spoken in a voice I couldn't place yet somehow knew. They whispered things no one else could know, memories, secrets I had buried deep within me, fragments of regrets I thought I'd left behind. Asterisk, you thought you could escape, didn't you? But it knows you, every piece of you, asterisk. I shook my head, my heart hammering in my chest as I tried to drown out the voice, pushing forward. But it grew louder, taunting, pulling at the darkest corners of my mind. Asterisk, remember that night you walked away, leaving it all behind? The promises you broke, the people you hurt, asterisk. It was relentless, dragging up memories I didn't want to confront, mistakes, betrayals, moments of weakness I had hoped to forget. It felt like the forest itself was reaching into my mind, peeling back layers to expose every flaw, every regret. Desperate to stop the voices, I spun around, determined to face whatever this thing was, to end this nightmare. But as I turned, the face was waiting, closer than ever before, just inches from me. I stumbled back, nearly losing my balance as I took in its features, the sunken, hollow eyes, the twisted mouth that seemed frozen in a mocking smile. It wasn't just watching me, it was enjoying my fear, feeding off it. Leave me alone, I shouted, my voice echoing in the emptiness, but the face didn't waver. It leaned in, its eyes boring into mine, and for a moment, I felt as if I were looking into a mirror, a grotesque, twisted reflection of myself. Then, as if on cue, the face melted into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The forest went silent, the whispers fading into an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself, when I noticed something strange. The path, which I had been following so desperately, now seemed unfamiliar. The trees, the leaves, even the ground beneath my feet had shifted subtly, their once familiar shapes now distorted, alien. Confused, I looked around, hoping to find some landmark, some indication of where I was. And that's when I saw it, my tent, sitting in the middle of a small clearing just a few feet away. My heart sank. Somehow, I had come full circle, back to where I had started. No, this can't be, I whispered, my voice trembling as I approached the tent, dread settling over me like a heavy fog. Had I even left the campsite at all, or had it all been an illusion, a cruel trick of the forest to keep me trapped? I reached out, my hand shaking as I touched the tent's fabric, feeling the familiar texture beneath my fingers. It was real. I was back. But how? I looked around, half expecting to see the twisted face lurking in the shadows, watching me, mocking my failed attempt to escape. The whispers returned, softer now, almost like a lullaby, wrapping around me like tendrils of smoke. Asterisk, you can't leave. This place is part of you now, and you are part of it. Asterisk. I backed away, my head spinning as I tried to make sense of the nightmare unraveling around me. The lines between reality and illusion had blurred, and I could no longer trust my own senses. Every direction I had taken led me back here, as if the forest itself was reshaping to keep me trapped, a maze designed to ensnare me. Desperate, I pulled out my phone, hoping to use the GPS to find my way, but the screen was a blur of static, the battery inexplicably draining until it shut off completely. My only lifeline to the outside world gone in an instant. A deep, sinking feeling washed over me as I dropped the phone, realizing that I was truly alone, left with nothing but my thoughts and the creature that seemed to haunt them. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing, forcing myself to think logically. There had to be a way out, I just hadn't found it yet. But as I sat there, staring into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere in the shadows, the face was waiting, biding its time. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the tent, gripping a branch I'd picked up from the ground, a feeble attempt at protection. The whispers grew louder as the hours passed, calling my name, weaving fragments of my past, my regrets, my fears into an unending, haunting melody that seemed to pulse with the beat of my own heart. As dawn finally broke, I felt a glimmer of hope. The light brought a sense of clarity, dispelling some of the night's horrors. I gathered my belongings, determined to try again, to find some way, any way, out of this cursed forest. But as I looked around, my resolve wavered. The forest, once familiar, now felt foreign, every path blending into the next, each tree an ominous sentinel watching my every move. I pushed forward, choosing a new direction, my mind steeling against the creature's taunts. Yet, no matter how far I walked, the twisted face appeared again and again, lurking at the edge of my vision, its hollow eyes reflecting my own fears, my own doubts. Hours passed, each step more exhausting than the last, until I felt as though I was walking in circles, the trees closing in, the whispers louder, mocking my every move. I tried to focus, to ground myself in reality, but the forest had become a maze, a prison designed to ensnare me in a loop I couldn't escape. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw it again, my tent, right where I'd left it, waiting for me as if I had never left. I sank to my knees, the weight of despair crashing over me. There was no way out. The forest had claimed me, trapping me in a web of my own fears and regrets, a never-ending cycle with no escape. The whispers grew louder, each word a sharp reminder of the life I had left behind, of the mistakes I had tried to bury. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that the creature wasn't just a twisted face lurking in the shadows. It was a reflection, a mirror of my own darkness, my own guilt, made manifest in the twisted form that haunted me. As night fell once more, I resigned myself to my fate, feeling the cold embrace of the forest settle over me. The creature would come for me again, as it had before, leading me in circles, a relentless pursuit with no end. And as I sat in the darkness, the whispers echoing through the trees, I understood that I was no longer a visitor here. This place was part of me now, and I was part of it, bound by the secrets I had tried so hard to escape. In that moment, I knew that I would never leave this forest. The twisted face, the haunting whispers, the endless maze, all of it was my penance, a price I would pay for eternity. And as the darkness closed in, I felt a sense of finality, a quiet acceptance that this was where I belonged, forever lost in the forest of my own making, haunted by the face that would never let me go.